I'm your host, Matt Miller, and welcome to Season 2 of You're Still Doing That? If you love the podcast and want to see it continue, go to www.yourstilldoingthat.com and leave a tip. If you have a lifelong passion you'd like to share, come on the show. Go to www.yourstilldoingthat.com and sign up to become a part of the podcast family. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok for fun videos to see what's coming up next. On with the show. Welcome to the show, everybody. Today we're talking with author JV Hilliard. Am I pronouncing that right?
You are.
All right. But we're going to go by Joe today. He is the writer of the Warminster Series. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. So I was telling Joe right before we started, I just knocked out his book right before we came in here. And it's a great read. The Last Keeper. If you like fantasy, I highly recommend it. It's a good book, and it's not just a one and done, but this is a series, sir. How many books are in your series in total so far?
It is a quadrilogy, so it'll end with the fourth, which comes out July 25th of this year. So the first three are out. First two are Amazon bestsellers. I'm hoping that the third and fourth meet that as well.
You just answered one of my questions that's going to come up later.
Didn't mean to.
Be. I knew the fourth one was coming. I was like, is it going to be the last? We checked that one right there. All right, Joe. So before we get into your book, I like to start everybody off at the beginning. So where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Grew up here, went to school here, then spent a little bit of time in Michigan. When I was in college, I played hockey, and then went to DC for my first real job. I spent some time doing defense work. I'm a defense lobbyist by trade, and so I work with a lot of defense and technology companies. And then got married, moved back to Pittsburgh, and had a chance to, over COVID, write my first fantasy book. So my career has changed, midstream. Went from one extreme to another. Defense lobbying is a pretty serious business, and now I'm writing fantasy.
Nice. So are you still doing the defense stuff, or are you writing full time now?
Yeah, no, that pays the bills, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
While I'm building my readership and with the slowly growing popularity of the Warminster saga, plus what follows, my hope is that I can eventually transition out of it entirely. But for now, that's the stuff that kind of gets you through every month.
That's
and
right.
Then, supplement that with my quote unquote side hustle, which is the fantasy novels.
Yep, we've all. You are on my side hustle at the moment, sir.
There you go.
So when did you discover that writing was a thing for you? That you were interested in writing a book?
I've always been interested. In fact, I knew from a very young age I was going to write a book. I wasn't sure what book, and in this case, books with an S.
Right.
But I grew up in a pretty unique household. My uncle was a Marine who was paralyzed in Vietnam, and he was like a second father to me. And my mother just happened to be his nurse. And so most of my kindergarten through 12th grade, I either lived there or in part was there 3-4 days a week. And he was very limited in what he could do because of his quadriplegic injuries. Right. And one of the things he could do was write. And the other thing he could do was another form of escapism, which was Dungeons and Dragons, right? It was all, for him, that was a way for him to escape his body and play a character out. And as a young kid, that was, it was popular at the time, and I wanted to do that stuff, and I kind of fell in love with it. And he wrote differently. Like, he was a short fiction guy. He wrote primarily like pulp fiction for the horror stories and things like that back when there were magazines on shelves. People still bought them at the Barnes and Noble or their local grocery store. Or subscribe to them. And I just fell in love with writing because he was, like I said, like a second father, and you always want to be what your dad is, right? And so for me, it was, I knew that I would write something, and I was pretty good at it. I always wrote above my grade level, and then for my career, I wrote every day. Now, it was
Right.
nonfiction.
I
It
was
was
thinking you
boring
were writing a
stuff.
lot. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you're talking legislation, speeches, policy position papers,
Yeah.
grants, procurement documents, things like that. But changing to writing fiction was a bit of a change, and that really kind of came about because of COVID. DC had shut down for
Yeah.
nearly a year and a half, and everybody was working remotely, and I had all this spare time on my hands, and I knew that I wanted to do it eventually, and
Yeah, yeah.
this was a chance to really get after it when COVID had us all in lockdown. And so the silver lining in it for me was, I had a chance to write what I thought was going to be the book,
Yeah.
and turned out to be a series, and kind of launched the back half of my career. So,
Yeah, I mean, how many people like not switched careers, but like switched focuses during COVID? They found time, and especially if you were one of the lucky ones that you were at home and you're still getting paid, but you're not really going to work. So you had this time and you had the resources because you're still getting a check. You could divert it to something you really like to do instead of what you've been doing all these other years, going to your job, and you can switch. You could have a whole show about people that switch gears during COVID.
yeah, and there's a ton of COVID era authors out there where
Yeah,
they were the first time, where people had always said, well, if I had the time, I would write a book. And
yep,
then there was a glut of them, me being one of them, that
yeah,
came out of that era. And some of us stuck to it.
yep, yep, yep. Well, that's good. All right, so let's get into your book, The Last Keeper, the Warminster Series. Very good read. I didn't find this, it's fantasy, but I didn't find it really extremely difficult. And I'm one of these people, I'm a public school teacher for 23 years, and I can butcher somebody's name. And so when I get a book, a lot of the times I'm reading the book and I call a character what I think their name is, and then I see it on the big screen one day, or I see a YouTube video of the author talking about it. I'm like, oh, that was what they're supposed to be called. But I didn't have too much of a trouble in here. Really good story to get sucked into. I really liked it. I got to tell you, my two favorite characters, my first favorite character is Ritter and his falcon. I think that's who I kept flipping the page and wanting to hear more about him and his men. What did you call them again? See
The Long Marchers.
the Long
Yeah.
Marchers. Yes, I wanted more of that. I was like, I want to know more about the Long Marchers. Like, what's their story, and what do they do, and what do they look like, and all this sort of stuff. That was it. And then Ritter has a little bit of a love story with Adeline, which I really like, that little complex of her royalty and his, like, yeah, I'm not quite my full race of person, but a little bit. So I really liked all of that. Can you give my listeners like a quick little overview of what The Last Keeper is about?
Sure. So The Last Keeper is, if you're familiar with the term hero's journey, it's something we've seen with Harry Potter or Luke Skywalker, or Iliad and the Odyssey, right? It goes all
Right.
the way back to Homer. And this is one of those hero's journeys for one of the three main characters, Damus Alaric, who is a keeper, which is someone who has a sentience that's ordained by their god. In this case, it's the god of knowledge, and he imparts visions to him when he sleeps. And as part of that, these people that are god touched, are sent away to a cathedral where they learn how to harness those powers for good, and then are sent out into the world back to where they came from to counsel kings and queens and emperors and empresses to do the right thing, to use
Right.
this stuff as part of that. And Damus isn't necessarily a coming of age story. This is a guy who's in his late teens, early 20s, and but he's learning how to harness this power, and he
Yeah.
sees the return of a fallen keeper, a man of his sect who had used this power of sight to his own benefit. We don't know what that is in the first book, but it was enough to
Right.
land him a pretty wicked curse by his god. And as a result, he's coming back to take revenge on the cathedral. And Damus is the only one that can see him coming. So you have all of these prophets and seers, and none of them have the ability to see the return of the fallen keeper, except for Damus, hence the name The Last Keeper.
Right.
And so it's a bit of a hero's journey for Damus, as well as some of, you mentioned Ritter and Adeline by name
Yeah.
a little earlier, and they come together to form a band of adventurers that are out there to try to stop Great Taurus the Mad, and those that are surrounding him as part of this, and that tumult cascades through all 4 books, and then obviously comes to a crashing halt at the end of
Right.
book 4, which I won't. No spoiler alerts here, but that's really what book 1 is about. Sir Ritter is a great character. I'm glad you brought him up because
Yeah.
he used to be a Dungeons and Dragons character of mine, and I played him very similarly to how I wrote him. And you're right, he's what I would call a trollborn. And if you're a Harry Potter fan, it's kind of like my version of a Muggle,
Muggleborn,
where it's not somebody that is, that he's a lowborn knight, half human, half elven. So both cultures look down on him.
Yeah.
And of course, he falls in love with the highest form of elf in the cast of elves, the Vermilion. And what they find out, and over the course of the book, is that there's all sorts of social mores and cultural restrictions on whether or not they should be falling in love, but they fall in love with each other, not just because of their feelings, but also because of the deeds. They're both valorous people. And it's whether or not Adeline's willing to give up the powers of where she is with Eldwall to be with Ritter, and it's whether Ritter's willing to look away from his duties to stay away from her because he loves her. And so I think that there's a lot of that forbidden love as a trope that gets drugged through there and culminates in book 3 and on to book 4. So I hope you keep reading.
Yeah, I plan on it too, man. You can't have a little bit of forbidden love in there that has to draw everybody in. So in the acknowledgement, see, I read the whole thing. I didn't leave any part out. In the acknowledgements in the back, you thanked all the folks that you play D&D with for the book. So my question is the Warminster series, was it one of your D&D games earlier on that now you've put down the page?
It's yes and no, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of the characters were lifted right out of 20 years of role-playing, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't write for Wizards of the Coast, so I can't use Dungeons and Dragons or The Realm. I can't use Middle Earth. I can't use Westeros. I can't use Shannara, right? So I created the Realm of Warminster and made requisite changes, to it. So I made my own Pantheon of Gods. I made my own currency. I made my own spell system. I made, a variety of governance as part of this, as you're supposed to do with an epic fantasy series. But, many of the characters that you'll read about actually had played as part of this. So whether it was me playing them as a player character or as whether it was me dungeon mastering them, and they were my player characters that were going through a campaign or an adventure, a lot of the stories had been battle tested, right? And I could tell which one of those stories were the better plot line, the better monster, the thing that was feared the most, the thing that was most rewarding for them. And what I did was, I took a lot of that stuff that had been, played out and wove it into what was this 4-book series as part of that. Now, there's a lot of new stuff in there too, because not every campaign is something you can just take verbatim. You can only take chunks of it. So I took some of the villains, I took some of the really cool heroes, put them together, and then build a new story around it. Some of which is familiar to my friends, others of which are, just completely fabricated because I needed to write a better story about it. And maybe they didn't do something that I wanted them to do as a dungeon master, and they went off on a 90-degree angle. But this is the real story and how it was supposed to go.
Yeah. One of the unlikely heroes in the story is Fox. And one thing I always do when I'm reading, I always try to picture what the character looks like based on the description the author's given, or just what my own head tries to pull up. But I could not seem to wrap my head around what Fox looks like. What does she look like to you? What is her, if that character is being drawn or put on screen, what do you think Fox is going to look like?
Yeah, so I refer to her often as the red-headed rogue. right? So I see her as someone that's a little skinny, a little malnourished because she's always on the run. She has crippling mental capacities because of the Iron Jack, which I won't get into. People can read about that, but it's unjustified sentence that was brought down to her, and she's been running for most of her adult life and much of her adolescent life as a result of that. And I, in my head, I kind of looked at her as a redheaded Sarah Connor from Terminator,
Yeah.
where she
Right.
learns these things on the street and is survivalist at her max. But when you learn her backstory, you find out that she was born a high noble from a very wealthy family. And, she's great on a horse and,
Yeah.
all the kind of things that play along with that. But as, Damus gets to know her, he doesn't see any of that. He doesn't know any of that's true.
Right. Right. Right.
Until later in the story. And it's her, you're right. I mean, for her, it's kind of a, can she find justice? Can
Yeah.
she be redeemed? And what does she do? The lengths she does, and you find her. I won't give this away, but there are things that she does to endanger herself for the right noble cause,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
which is helping Damus in this case. And so in Fox's case, I saw her as Sarah Connor with red hair.
Yeah. That would be a good thing. The mom turned warrior. Yeah.
Yep.
I do like that. Sarah Connor with red hair. I do love that one. That's right. Because in the book, it talks about her younger, but now it's later on towards the end of the book. So that would plot just about right. I like that call. Uh, um, and another guy that at first glance, when you bring him in, I think you're meant to sort of like not like him, like he's a showboat, but he turns out to be able to back up his showboat. And I hope I'm going to pronounce his name correctly, but Admiral Labrec. Am I saying that his name right?
Yep, Valeric Lebrec. You got it. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Lebrec is one of my favorite sidebar characters because he actually his importance will grow as we get closer to book 4.
Right. Because he comes later
But
on in the story.
yeah, but he's exactly that. He's this young swashbuckling admiral of royalty. Women
Yeah.
swoon when they see him. He's
He's
never
the
lost a sea battle.
opposite of Jack Sparrow, right? Of Jack Sparrow as the swashbuckler, but he's dirty and nobody likes him and he loses a lot of battles, but he still seems to luck out every time. So this is the good-looking twin brother that's got it all.
That's right. And Lebrec is somebody who, to me, is the embodiment of that Renaissance era pirate, except he's the admiral, right? Like he
Yeah.
has all the traits that you want in a pirate, but he's on the good team.
Right.
And in this case, he uses some of those talents in book 1 and really gets to use them in book 4. And you find out a little bit more about him as the series goes along. But Lebrec, and what I wanted to do with him was, one of the things that I don't want to say bothered me, but many fantasy novels are all Earth-based. Very, very rare of them are seaborne. And I wanted to have some sort of sea connectivity,
Yeah.
to what we were doing. And I think these big heroic battles on the seas not only lend itself to quality and a lot of fun fantasy battles, especially when you start throwing in magic
Yes.
into that. I think that's pretty cool. But I also think that since we haven't seen it, I wanted to feature it in a way where it would make my book stand out amongst other fantasy novels. It may have gone in a different direction, and I think that that you'll see that play out this in book 1, which you read. There's a couple of really nice
I was
seaborne
going to
battles.
say there's a whole battle on the sea when you get towards the end of the book. There's a whole battle at sea, and I think you're right. I haven't read a ton of fantasy, but you're right. I don't know about how much of it on the sea that I've covered, and we've got like naval wizards in here that are just for naval tactics, but with magic. I was like, that's kind of cool. I don't know if I've quite heard of that one before or not.
No, see, that's what I like about it is there is a unique quality to it. I've read some. I'm not going to say it's not out there, but ultimately, I think that for without everybody having magic, how do you get around the realm quicker? Well, you take
Yeah.
boats, right? And
Right.
and this is a way, for them to do that. But the magical battles on the sea are just a lot of fun to write, coupled with the fact that you can get away with a lot of stuff in fantasy, with some inventive technology that I used, and some other things that kind of play out that I think lends itself to Lebrec's greater story as the series goes on.
Yeah. And the last character that I liked on there, is it Uncle Kester?
Uncle Kester
Yeah.
Alaric, that's right.
A little bit of Quill from The Mandalorian I had in my mind. Maybe not as old as him, but a little bit of the older guy that saves the day at
Yeah,
the end.
I wrote him. I got inspiration for his character on my uncle that I talked about a little bit about earlier, right? So when I was younger, he was my mentor, and so Kester mentors Damus in the same
Yep.
way. And there's a lot of draws to the family, right?
Right.
Where Kester didn't have a son of his own, couldn't have a son of his own, was sort of always out doing the wrong thing. And even though that wasn't necessarily my uncle was obviously unmarried, was unable to have kids. I was the closest thing to a child that he would ever have, and so for me, I drew that connection from a personal experience where I was able to take that love between uncle and nephew, in this case, almost a father-son kind of relationship,
Yep.
and bake it in. And Kester ends up, sacrificing himself in the same way my uncle sacrificed himself in war, in many respects. And so I try to draw some parallels there without it being too overdone.
Right. Right.
But
Right.
ultimately, I think Kester he's a fun character. He was a fun character to write. And obviously, I like the relationship that he had with Damus, and wanted to play that up, especially in book one.
Yep. 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 That was a good one. So I highly recommend go check out The Keeper, um, especially if you're looking for like a new series to start or something different. Definitely check it out. It's a good read. It took Nis Neanderthal. Let's see. I started this. Let's see. When did I start? I think I started Friday because I meant to start earlier, but I got tied up, and I started Friday and read a little bit Saturday, and then man, I read a ton of this thing um, on Sunday. I read quite a bit on Sunday, and then my wife had a dentist appointment, and I sat there for 2 hours just reading that. So that was good. It went by fast. So I definitely recommend check out The Keeper. There's two more in the series and a fourth one. When does the fourth one come out?
July 25th. So almost a month tomorrow, a month today. Holy cow, we're
Yeah.
within the 30-day range. Yeah.
Yep. So help Mr. Hilliard out. Buy his, go get all his books, but especially his fourth one on the 25th. You can support my birthday on July 23rd by buying his book on the 25th. And I'll definitely be checking out. I don't know if I have the other two read by then, but I'll definitely give them a read through. I'll let you know, sir.
Oh,
I'll give you
here's
some.
a little secret too. I also have audiobooks, and so if it's better for you to listen than to read,
Oh,
download those, because
was this on
people, that's
audiobook? Well, I didn't. Yeah. Well, I got to say kudos to
yes.
you because you sent me the book to look at. So I didn't look online for them, but yeah, audiobooks for this ADD guy. That's the way to go, man. I love
It
audiobooks.
is. You can listen to them in the car while you're doing laundry, whenever you want, and I
Now,
think that helps some
are
folks in
are
different
you
places of life. Right?
right? Are you reading the book or is someone else reading the book?
No, I've got a professional voiceover actor. His name is Victor Bavine, and Victor's really well known in the fantasy sci-fi community.
Yeah.
Some people will recognize his voice. Other people buy the audiobook just because they like listening to him. He's a very good voiceover actor, and he's done some high-end stuff. I got lucky to nab him when I did, to get him to do this, and so go ahead and give a listen to my words, Victor's voice.
Right. Well, yeah, I love an audiobook. As you can tell behind me, I do like to put some Legos together. And one thing I like to do is put on an audiobook, um, and while I'm Legoing away, because one, lets me keep track of how long something has taken to do, because I can just stop the book when I'm finished and start it back up. Yeah, so check out his series. You guys will definitely love it. Um, Now, your book is not just going to stay on page. There is talk of your series being produced into a video game. Is that right?
That's correct. I licensed the intellectual property for the series over to a company that's doing an augmented reality and virtual reality game for it. Both versions are due out to the public in 2026, and they're going to do some beta testing on it this in 2025, this coming year.
Nice.
So if you want to be an early adopter to that, you can go to melderverse.com and sign up for that, and you'll get some early adopter free play
Oh,
as part of
sweet.
that. Yeah, and I'm hoping that I'm going through the storyboarding process right now, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But I always feel like I'm on the sideline for it because you're never, you write these books and it's very linear. Like it's a
Yes.
story gets you from point A to point B. But in a video game, you have license to do whatever you want, and that
Right.
can mean being a bad guy if you wanted to, and however you create your avatar and the skills that you get and things like that will be, dependent on what you want to do and how you want to build your character. So you could play against Ritter and Adeline if you wanted to, and for Great Taurus the Mad. So, it's fun to see it taking a different form,
Right.
as we do that. But that should be out here in the next, almost year and a half.
Wow. So, what's that process like? Do you have like any say over the renderings of your characters or changing of storyline? Any? Do you getting any voice in that?
It's a bit of both, right? So part
Yeah.
of it is what I described earlier as being part of the storyboarding process. My job is to set the guide rails for them to stay in between.
Right.
And part of that is I have to give them their own creative license to do what they need to do. I am not a video game programmer. I'll
Right.
never be a video game programmer, and they know their medium better than I do. So I don't want to get in their way. And some of that means they have to take that creative license and do things that might not be in the novel, right? Or novels. And I understand that. And in the beginning, once you are accustomed to that reality and you realize that it would be the same, you'd be telling them the same thing if they were coming to you and saying, "Hey, I got this great video game. It's super popular. Can you make a book out of it? We want to make a series out of it." And I would say, "Great. Tell me what you need me to have in the novels. I'll write
Yeah.
it and bring it back to you."
Right.
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 So
Right.
I
Right.
try to put myself in that same vein. And it's not easy to sit there and see things change, but
Yeah.
by the same token, you become accustomed to it. And as long as they stay within sort of the confines I've drawn up for them, then we haven't had any problems since.
Right. Right. And it's also being moved into a graphic novel, right?
That's correct. In fact, after I'm done with this call, I'm talking to my illustrator later on tonight. We've got about 20 cells done. Takes us what would be in the book that you just showed, The Last Keeper. We go through book 3, or chapter 3, rather.
Yeah.
And it's going to be an entire series there. That release date is also scheduled for middle of 2026. But the goal there is to take what is a very illustrative and graphic novel series and turn it into a comic book, right? And I'm a
Right.
comic
Right.
book nerd. And some of the stuff that I think my scenes lend themselves well to adaptation in that
Right.
format. So even though they're squishing out a 150,000 word novel down to 8 cells on 2 different pages with 1 sentence here and a half a sentence there and an
Yeah.
action verb there, it's a little different. So it's not going to be very wordy,
Right.
but I think the challenge there is how do you take what I've described and put it on into one square cell of
Yeah.
action. And we're through chapter 3, as I said, and it's amazing how well they do that stuff. It takes a gift that I don't have to do that, and but these guys are top shelf, and I'm pretty excited about what they've got going on so far.
Well, it sounds like your series is on its way, sir. A lot of positive things happening for it. And now you're not just an artist yourself, but you give people the opportunity to get published if they're maybe finding difficulty to get published. You've got a website called the Altered Reality Magazine, which you describe as a speculative fiction writers or gives speculative fiction writers a path for publication. What exactly is I can't even say the word again. Speculative fiction writer.
Sure. So anybody that writes in nonfiction, but stuff like sci-fi, fantasy, horror, dystopian, gothic, monster stuff, so it has to have some level of sci-fi or fantasy involved in it. So it won't be, a crime story unless there's a
Right.
werewolf in it, right?
Yeah.
Like
Gotcha.
that's the kind of, you step over the line in a spec. So we publish speculative fiction and we publish speculative poetry. So if you want to write poetry about something that's Star Trekky or Star Warsy,
Yeah. Yeah.
or you've got your own realm and things like that. We even have horror poets. I didn't know that was a thing
Eh,
until I had a horror poet write to me, and she wanted to do, some stuff, and it's basically poetry for people that love the horror genre and
right.
the gothic and monsters and stuff like that. And so we started publishing that as part of the magazine. So the magazine is, if you go to alteredrealitymag.com, you'll check it out. We get about 180,000 visitors a year, so it's well visited. And we
Yes.
have award-winning authors, from international award winners all the way down, for, like you said, people that are seeking their first portal to publication. And through our submission guidelines, we will help folks that are looking to get to get published for the first time, as well as folks that we know are already published. And if we have to turn someone down, we typically tell them, hey, there's a certain level of editing that needs to come with this, or
Right.
formatting needs to come with this. And once you get it done, send it back, and we'll reconsider it. So we never really turn anybody away. The site is supposed to be for the love of, right?
Right.
And
Right. Right.
so it's paid for by some of our sponsors. None of us make any money at it. I don't pay anybody to do it, but it's out there. And for some, this gives them a chance to be exposed in a realm of readers that are going to read their stuff. And if they like their short story, they like their poem, they like their serial, they may go out and buy their books.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where we help them along those lines. So that's what I wanted to do with it, and that's what we've been doing it with it for the last couple of years. And it's been well received, I think, by many that have used it as a tool to advance themselves, and frankly a community to get to know other people.
Right. Well, yeah, and definitely, because there's a lot of people that write, but they don't know how to publish or where to go or what can I do to get my stuff somewhere. So that's a good first step for people to do. All
Agreed.
right. All right, Joe. I've got some sort of fun questions to run by you. Uh,
All right.
so, was The Last Keeper your first book that you wrote?
It was.
All right. Well, you knocked it out of the park on your first one for sure.
Oh, thanks.
You did a good step up. You also mentioned being a fan of D&D. What was the longest campaign that you were a part of?
So we went into level 36 or something ridiculous like that. And a lot of that was back in high school when you got a lot of free time to
Yeah.
burn. You guys, when your friends don't mind being up until 2 o'clock in the morning and playing 4 days in a row, and over the weekend doing marathon sessions.
Yeah.
And we just wanted to see how high our characters, we could get them. And it really becomes godlike. It's like ridiculous.
Right.
But for us, I think that's the highest. Nowadays, we kind of peter out like 13th, 15th level, 17th
Yeah, yeah.
level, where, we're more refined in our play now. And it's more about the characters and the stories that come from it, as well as, things that we've never done before. Because we've done
Right.
the dungeon crawls and the Cape on the Borderlands stuff where you're just hacking and slashing. This is more like, I'm going to create a character that no one's ever seen, and I'm going to play this character the best that I can. And I might not pick the most powerful spells. I might not pick or want the most powerful items. I want to play my character the way my character was meant to be played in the plot line.
Right.
Even
Right.
if it hurts me to some degree, while also having a fun time doing it, right? And that it becomes more about the story and things like that. So that's the highest I've gone, and that's kind of where we are now. We're about half of that. When we get to like that 15th level range, we kind of, we're usually retiring them because the story's ending, the campaign's coming
Right.
to a
Right.
close.
Right. What's a fantasy series that you love? What's one of your favorite fantasy series?
Oh my goodness, where to start? I think the Dark Elf trilogy by R.A. Salvatore has got to be my favorite. He
Yeah.
has like 40 Dritz Duorden novels now, so it's not like it's hard to pick out of
Yeah.
that group. But because I started with a Dark Elf trilogy, I would have to say that kind of got me into it. I love Dragonlance,
Yeah.
Sword of Sonara series, obviously Tolkien, Game of Thrones, kind of brought that dark fantasy stuff into the fore for many folks, where the good guys don't always win,
Yeah.
which I enjoyed. I mean, there's so many out there. I even like the old school Dungeons and Dragons spin-offs like Ravenloft. I just
Yeah.
got done rereading I Strahd a few days ago, actually a few weeks ago now, and it's like mixing two of my favorite things. You got vampires and Dungeons and Dragons. You push them all together, and you get a pretty cool vampire, and it kind of follows along one of our favorite modules, one that we've played a couple of times. You
Yeah.
think like 10 years off in between play, and stuff like that, 5 years, and then come back after it. It's a popular series, but those are the ones I think are my all-time favorites.
Awesome. Yeah. A lot of big titles you mentioned there. So it's talking about your The Last Keeper book. If it was cast into a film, who do you think would play Damus, one of the lead characters? What type of person?
So that's a tough one, because you know what, part of it is my wife and her friends like to pick every hot guy out there and cast them for me.
Right.
So I'm tainted because I have to hear about this character is this guy and this character is that guy. But in this case, Damus is kind of he kind of reminds me of, and I forget the name of the actor, but the kid that played in Stranger Things. He's just sort of a skinny, uncoordinated
Right.
nerd who has all sorts of constitutional problems because he's in his own plight. So I would probably think Mike from Stranger Things, whoever
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
character is, whoever he
Yeah.
is, and he's not outgrown it yet. He's in that right age where he could probably play that really well right now, because
Yeah.
he is kind of nerdy, and he's it just, I think it fits the character until Damus matures a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to see Mike put a mace into the Blood Axe clan. uh, Especially if you put that
Well played, sir. Well
yeah,
played.
put the imagery from the forget I'm terrible remembering names, but the guy who did the 300 movies and all those other stuff, all that imagery and the slow motion and yeah,
Yeah.
that would be
Oh
great.
yeah.
That'd be great.
It would be a good scene there. That Battle of Ham Hill, man. That would be a great one.
That would be, yeah, that's definitely Game of Thrones level of stuff happening right there. All this stuff coming in left and right. Oh, and I kept trying to picture the hounds that they rode in on, that those clans rode in, the kind of,
Horsehounds. Yeah.
yeah, horse hounds, dog, horse. I was like, God, that's got to be just menacing to if that ever came onto some sort of screen or something. I can't wait for your graphic novel or video game to get
There's a lot of
chased by
CGI for that one.
horse hounds and virtual reality. Oh, uh,
Oh yeah. You'll be
uh,
running out your door.
yeah, most definitely. All right. Um, so well, there is a book 4 coming July 25th. That was my last question for you. If we're going to have a book 4, or when it's coming, or if it's the end. So definitely check out a series. Joe, I'm going to wrap everything up today. I asked everybody the same, like 6 questions on the end, and it's fun to see how people answer. So here we go. No, you don't have to give a lot of thought. Just first thing off the top of your head, what's your favorite smell?
My mother's homemade spaghetti.
Ooh, that's a good one. Homemade spaghetti. My
Meat
mom would,
sauce. Oh, it's
yeah,
so good. So good.
my mom would always make bread. That was a similar smell for me. What's
Yep.
your favorite kind of sandwich?
Whew. So I'm in Pittsburgh, and there
Yeah,
is a restaurant here called Permanis, and the Permani sandwich is world famous for having your choice of meat, fries, and then a vinegary coleslaw slapped on it between two big slices of Mancini bread, which
yeah,
is also a local company. And if you watch enough sporting events, every time someone's here, they visit one of the Permani brothers to get a Permani sandwich, and that's my favorite sandwich.
I've heard that on ESPN before, talking about going getting one of those sandwiches on there when they go to Pittsburgh. What's your favorite kind of drink?
In the summer, I love Moscow Mules. I'm a vodka
Yeah.
guy. And in the winter, I like the double box. I like really thick, hearty German beers, dark beers. And but like summer ale, Sam Summer Ale, or like a nice IPA this time of year is
Yeah.
is perfect. For me, I think that's what I would do. I'm a seasonal guy.
Yeah.
I'll blend into that Oktoberfest beer, and then the winter double box that's got me until March.
I love it. Yeah, I'm a definitely seasonal as well. For some reason, I'm a big fan of Mexican beer. Those tend to
There's
be
nothing wrong with that.
where I tend to anything I can stick a lime in, I'm down to drink. If you can put a lime in
There
it,
you go.
I'm there for it.
There you go.
Um, what does your dream vacation look like?
I want to. So part of it is already. So this is a cheat. I've got two dream vacations. So
Yeah.
when my wife and I got married, we went on our dream vacation, which was we spent 10 days in Europe. We stayed in four
Nice.
different castles. I'm a castle buff, as you can
Right, right,
imagine.
right.
So we stayed in castles in Scotland, England, and Germany while we were there. And for our 25th anniversary, we're going to go back and do the same thing this time. Maybe stay in some different castles, except for one that I definitely know she wants to go back to. But my the one vacation that I want to take, I haven't been able to take yet, is I want to go visit Dracula's castle in Romania,
Yeah.
and get over there and do sort of like stay in Budapest, and take the road up to the Solomon's Tower, and just visit Castle Dracula,
Yeah, yeah.
and have a good time there. That in October. I've got to talk my wife into that one, or that's going to be a tough one. We'll have to
Doesn't
stop
sound very
somewhere fun,
romantic, sir. Yeah.
like Italy on the way over or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, I'll have to work her in. She gets half, I get half. My half is a
Right.
little bit more gothic than hers, I think.
I'm about to say, how romantic is to go to Dracula's castle? We're going to sleep in coffins and everything, honey. uh, uh, um, who is the most famous person you've ever met?
I've met several presidents, and I've met a number of congressional, senatorial
I was
people,
about to say your job
because of my
probably
job,
leads to a little bit
obviously.
of that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I've met every president from Clinton on at some point or another. And then, of course, all the leaders of the House and Senate
Yeah.
over the
Yeah.
last
Yeah.
20 years. And then on the sports side, I've met a lot I've done sports and entertainment work too as part of my stuff. So, the Mario Lemieux for hockey, or a lot of the former Steelers here and some other
Yeah.
cities and things like that. So it just depends. It's hard to say anybody could be more famous than a president. So I'll say the presidents.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the presidents are pretty famous. That's my one famous person I've met was my wife and I met Obama years ago. She won a contest to go fly out and meet him. And so we got to meet him,
That's
and that
cool.
was pretty cool. So I've got a buddy who's a big Pittsburgh Steelers fan. I don't know if you're a
Uh,
Steelers fan or not.
I am. He's a gentleman and a scholar. I could
Yeah,
tell you about your buddy already.
you should check out that. I did a podcast with him, and it was nothing but Pittsburgh Steelers, and so I tried to write as many. Um, I tried to write as many like trivia questions to stump him as I could, going all through Steelers history from their conception to present. And man, he was nailing off everything. He is an expert on the Steelers. So if you ever want to do a little Steelers fan, go check out that episode. That one's really good.
I'll definitely do that.
That was really good. I always he the Steelers have been suffering about as much as my Carolina Panthers have been. A little bit, not as bad as my Panthers,
Not as bad. Not as
but
bad.
but not quite as bad. But our quarterback issues are getting legendary here.
Yep.
All right, man. So that's going to wrap us up for this episode. It's good to have you on the show, Joe. Check out his book, The Last Keeper. Remember, this is the first of what will be four on July 25th. I get that come out right. The Warminster Series. Check it out. It's a great read. You guys will love it. Joe, I appreciate you coming on.
It has been my absolute pleasure, and thanks. I'd be more than happy to come back anytime.
Hey, I might have to talk to you after July 25th, man. We'll talk about your fourth one.
Sounds like a plan.
All right, remember, folks, find out what makes you happy and do it. There's a lot of life out there to live, so make it a good one. Be kind, be nice, and everyone, have a good week. Thanks for listening to You're Still Doing That. If you love the show, check us out on our website, www.you'restilldoingthat.com, and leave a tip. You can also find the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok.